Hello to Vatnik Soup and hello to Robin, our co-host. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm currently in Lviv. It is midnight here. I'm filling the shoes of Alex, who couldn't be here, so I'm quite honored that I can fill the spot. Yeah, my name is Vatnik Soup. I'm Dutch. I participate in the Vatnik Soup project. I'm also moderator of NAFO Reddit, and yeah, I'm also a co-host here in Volya. Yeah, I hope to discuss a little bit more about the disinformation and everything that's involved. And it's always busy when it comes to disinformation. You know, there's never a boring moment when it comes to this war. So I think there's plenty to discuss. Yeah, I think yeah, let's give the word to Robin. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello there. You know, it's funny about Nick Soup. I saw your name in the back channels, which is different than your online name. I had no idea who I was hosting with, so this is a pleasant surprise. Good to see you. Yeah, there is never any dearth of information or discussion when it comes to Russian disinformation. You know, like they say about lawyers, the same thing about Russian officials. How you can tell they're lying is that their lips are moving. So I think we're going to be in for a big push of disinformation and propaganda now that they have rejected the 30-day ceasefire for all sorts of interesting reasons. Let's put it that way.
Well, I think we couldn't expect that Putin would say, "Oh, just I'll agree with the ceasefire." So it would be either more demands or you know, declining it straight away. So I think we saw the second option here, and Putin will probably use some propaganda to blame Ukraine for it all, as he has done always. But yeah, that's an interesting part of the propaganda war as well. You know, Ukraine is always being portrayed as the one who is not cooperative, and I think the current events are a perfect display of who is really uncooperative. So yeah, in a way, it's nice that Russia is finally showing its cards. I personally think that Russia is too committed to this war to you know, to even quit it or even do a ceasefire. But yeah, who knows? Who knows what will happen? It's quite unpredictable. Yeah, I see that more people join the chat, so I'd like to you know, announce the service message that Alex gave me. So this is Disinformation Dispatch, your Thursday night disinformation discussion on Volya Radio from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. We will be tackling the complex and disturbing world of disinformation with a focus on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Each week, we will discuss the latest disinfo trends, uncover the truths we can, and arm you with knowledge to help you stay informed. Our goal is to cut through the noise and get to the signal. Yeah, before we begin, please remember, keep questions or comments topical, brief, and focused. Given the short time frame of our show, moderation will be strict to ensure constructive discussion. I just read this message from Alex. I think it was, you know, it was so to the point that I had to repeat it. Yeah, back to you, Robin.
Oops, sorry, just trying to throw a few things up in the nest. Yeah, it's this is going to be interesting. I don't know. Usually Alex has something all planned, and I'm not sure what we're planning. We definitely can start going over some of the demands that Putin has made. You know, it's interesting because they didn't, of course, say that they refused to accept the ceasefire. It's just that they have certain you know, a couple of little demands, like Ukraine needs to withdraw from all of the oblasts that Putin claims, even those that they have not managed to take over in part or in full. That Ukraine needs to give up any idea of ever joining NATO. I don't remember a few other things like that. So it'll be interesting to talk about that.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I talked a little bit with Alex. I would like to discuss also what's happening currently in Romania with Georgescu, the politician that has been, you know, he can't run for office anymore. Basically, that's the story. I want to dig a little bit deeper into that and where Russian propaganda plays a role. I'd also like to discuss basically the whole thing where Russia tries to discredit the legitimacy of Zelensky, and if if one thing became clear, it's that Russia doesn't like Zelensky uniting Ukraine. So they have been steering the wheel to get, to get another leader, because they think they will be weaker and won't be able to unite the country so much. So I like to dig a little bit deeper on, how Ukraine was perceived like 10 and 20 years back, how it was perceived like two areas, and how the country has united under Zelensky, because that was a really interesting process. And yeah, like you said, the current events are also quite interesting, how Putin steers negotiations, and he tries to go back actually to the conditions that he wanted in the Istanbul negotiations that happened April 2022, where he basically, what Russia always does is it's use different terms. So it uses talks about capitulation as peace talks. It uses the words negotiation, while it clearly just only puts demands to Ukraine, and Ukraine can't even put demands back. So this wording is important as well, I would say. So back to you. I don't know which topic you would like to touch first. If people here in this space have questions as well, feel free to raise your hands up. Back to you, Robin.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, please, anyone who wants to join in, please come up to speaker and join us. It's always more interesting when we have other voices. This whole issue of disunity I find interesting. Russia has been trying to drive a wedge in between different parts of Ukrainian society since long before 1991, long before independence. Ukrainians are not as dumb as the Russians think they are, and they basically have sussed it out most of the time. In fact, the last politicians in Ukraine have tried to use this East-West divide, the Russian versus Ukrainian speaker, and it's fallen flatter and flatter as things go on. Every politician who's run for, well, I should say, for every presidential campaign, there has been someone who's tried to use this. The latest was Petro Poroshenko, who ended up losing with over 70% of the vote, because Ukrainians are wise to this. Ukrainians know that some people speak Russian, people speak Ukrainian, but that has never really been the division, caused the division in Ukrainian society that the Russians had hoped it would. But the Russians keep on trying. They tried in 2014 to gin up anti-Semitism on the Maidan and to frighten Ukrainian Jews from one of the largest Jewish communities in Europe. But nobody bought it. So it's I just hope that this continues. Zelensky has become even much more popular in the last few weeks after being treated the way he was treated by Elon Musk's stand-ins there, Trump and what's his name, Vance. Um, I don't see Ukraine being divided up. In fact, if they were to somebody was to force an election on Ukraine, which I don't think anyone will be able to, but the next most popular politician after President Zelensky is Valery Zelensky, and I don't think, from Russians' viewpoint, he would be much of an improvement. So, we shall see. But back to you, Vatnik Soup.
I fully agree with you. Currently, Zelensky would be an interesting choice. Though I do think Zelensky's strength is that he has united all of Ukraine. Zelensky might be able to do the same, but we don't know Zelensky as a politician. Zelensky has been a general. He's been basically put out of the job, and now he's diplomat. So we don't know. So we don't know Zelensky's role as a politician, how capable he is. In history, there have been good and bad examples of generals, military men becoming politicians. I see Arnold has his hand up, so please go ahead, Arnold.
Good day. I have one question. Now that the Americans have agreed to send their army materials, do you think that's going to be a significant change, so that basically Ukraine can move forward, or is it more a situation from we have to stabilize and then look ahead?
Yeah, if I may answer the question, Robin, I'm in Ukraine right now, and I'm actually speaking to people from the Foreign Legion, so I hear a bit of the news on the ground and how stuff is perceived. I don't think you need to see the whole material thing as like a groundbreaking thing for Ukraine at the moment, but it's definitely a push in the right direction, but it won't be a decisive push. Let's put it like that. I think the more important part is the intelligence. Um, the Ukrainians have been blindsided a bit at the front because they didn't receive the intelligence anymore. So the big question is, will Ukraine receive that intelligence, and will it receive the intelligence at the same level as the Biden administration has always provided it? That's basically one of the more important points. That would hugely help Ukraine. It's so important to have the right info on the field. It can save so many lives. I see that we have a.
I just wanted to
Sorry.
add, I know but next up, I agree with you. And I think more of the issue with all of this is whether one, the intelligence remains trustworthy, and I hope to God the Ukrainians share as little as possible with the United States. I don't think that we're trustworthy at this point. And the other thing is what I am more concerned about with the United States finally deciding to discontinue that brief stoppage of material is that nobody in the rest of Europe should get the idea that they don't have to be as proactive, that they don't have to get Europe together, get their defenses together, and take over as much as they can of supporting Ukraine, because Trump could get out of bed tomorrow morning and decide to cut everything off again. So that's my biggest concern of all of this. Back to you, Vanessa.
Yeah, I think you make a great point with the unreliability of the whole situation. And yeah, you can trust Trump as far as you can throw him in my eyes. So, next week things can be different. Yeah, that was my point exactly. I see James has his hand up, so go ahead, James.
Hey, yeah. Well, I popped up to say something different, but I'll chime in on this aid from the U.S. This is the very tail end of the PDA, 3.8 billion. There's no supplemental that's on the table. I don't think that the continuing resolution has aid in it. We have not seen the restoration of the civilian aid that went or should have gone to Ukraine under the USAID. So there's a lot of already lost things that will never be recouped. And the maximum at this point, that at least legally, and now Trump, I doubt, is going to break the law for Ukraine's sake, but he could, but I doubt that. But legally, that PDA is all the money there is that we're talking about at this point. And I think to be to be honest, what we need is really the Stand with Ukraine Act to be passed, which would be pretty solid stream of aid for some time to come, and that would assure that the goals are met. So that was my answer to that particular thing. If you want to comment on that, but I had a different thing, and that was just to talk about the negotiations for a ceasefire and the ridiculous conditions. And thank you, Robin, for posting a list of them. At you and Lexicon posting them where I saw them. So good for you. Thank you. And what we know is that on the other side, on the Ukrainian side, there is a list of asks. Now, Bondarenko, I think it was last time, talked about the illusion of balance, the idea that whether you're a news, outlet who's doing fair and balanced, or, balancing this need against that. Well, they haven't even talked about what the Ukrainians have in their, plan for peace. And those are all good things. They haven't even been introduced. So there is not even the illusion of balance. The United States is basically letting the void be filled by Russia at this point. And so I don't see them acting very well. And this is such a tremendous disinformation campaign. And in the meantime, we've seen crazy statements, but logical from the Russian point of view, that this massive attack on Moscow is unprecedented and is aimed at everything but military sites, and so completely illegal, horrendous. And this is all crap. So I think this applies as disinformation. So maybe it'll be good with the soup.
Yeah, I would say, James, one thing I would say about the Russians whining about the attack on Moscow is boo hoo hoo. But I just wanted to mention also, James referred to Professor Alexander Bondarenko. If you haven't had a chance to listen to his five-part series he had with us on disinformation and Russian propaganda, Professor Bondarenko is one of the foremost authorities in Ukraine on the use of language in Russian propaganda. He's a professor of East Slavic Studies at the Kiev Shevchenko National University, and all of those sessions are up on our Spotify feed. So if you haven't heard them, he's very critical and good. He's a very what's the word? Very logical thinker. It's and the lectures are very on point and very clear. So it's definitely worth listening to, not only to understand what the propaganda is, but how to identify the types of manipulation that the Russians attempt to use. One that Vatnik Soup was talking about dividing people into groups, and as James was saying, the both sidesism, as though Russian lies should be treated the same as truths on the other side. For example, argument from authority, people saying, well, you have to listen to anything I say because I'm a big authority, without giving any proof of what they're saying. So anyway, I just refer you to our Spotify account. A lot of interesting things up there. One of those are those sessions from Professor Alexander Bondarenko. Back to you, Vatnik Soup.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, and anyone who is not familiar with Mr. Bondarenko, please go listen. The space is back, because he's a scientist and he perceives this all from a scientific point of view, and that gives it more depth. He's quite knowledgeable on the subject. I see we have I hope I pronounce your name correctly, Ailey Hell, with your hand up. So please go ahead. Ailey, or if I pronounce your name not correctly, please.
Yes, Ukraine. Thank you for letting me speak. I would like to explore 2 points. First, the two is that Russia deployed a AFFAB 3000 bomb in Suja, almost completely destroying the city. A terrorist country like this wants no.
I'm afraid we're not going to let people come up and deliver lies like that. I'm sorry about Nick Soup, but I'm not going to. This guy's been a problem in the past, and I see he has not reformed.
Okay, yeah, fair point. I see we have another person coming up. Let's see if it's the same person. Okay. Let's switch back to basically one of the topics we touched before, and that was the divided Ukraine. And I have a little bit of a personal history with it. To fully explain, well, when Ukraine became independent, there were all these small movements that wanted their own independent state, and they were French, and they were not supported by the majority of the people. But you always have these people that want their own little project. And one of the most famous examples is the Goncharev Republic. The Goncharev Republic dates back basically to the current Donetsk Republic. And even the current Donetsk Republic, if you really dive into history, the Russians related back to a small republic they founded in the aftermath of the First World War, when they were fighting a war with Ukraine. and Russia made this puppet state called the Donbas Republic as well. Yeah, my bigger point here is that Russia always tries to ground itself with history, and they tried to ground an Odessa Republic in 1991, but it was really fringe. In 1994, they had an attempt to ground a Crimean Republic with the revolution of Yuri Meshkov. That basically also failed because the Ukrainian SBU intervened in the end. But Russia has been trying this continuously. So in 2004, in Severodonetsk, they support other people who want to ground a Donetsk Republic. And in 2005, even Mr. Lushkov, mayor of Moscow and one of the more important people in Putin's party, attends a conference of people who want to ground a Kharkiv Republic. So Russia has always been doing this, and they've always tried to create these small republics within Ukraine. And one other strategy they've always used is, like we said before, they always tried to paint Ukraine as a divided country. And one of the most famous examples is Putin actually, in 2008, he meets some Polish diplomats, and he actually pronounces that, why can't we split up Ukraine? Wasn't Lviv like a former Polish province? So why can we solve it with you, Poland? You get Lviv, we get the rest. And he even repeats to President Bush that in 2008 that he doesn't see Ukraine as a real country. But Putin has done more. In 2004, he attends basically the election group, not election group, the campaign group of Yanukovych. And he supports Yanukovych in his own campaign to become a president. We will later learn that the Orange Revolution will prevent this. But at that point in 2004, Putin was fully on board to get Yanukovych elected. And one of the more interesting things that happens then is that Russian propaganda starts to launch a map of Ukraine, which basically portrays Ukraine as East and West Ukraine. Like there's a big divide in the country, like it's culturally different. And he even tries to portray Ukraine as a country that, that because of that has no legitimacy. So this has always been Russia's strategy. And I must admit, I was on the Maidan myself in 2013, 2014. And even back then, I sort of still had this belief that Eastern Ukraine, they're different. They're not, they're more to the Russian side, etc., etc. And what I didn't know was how many people in provinces like Donbas and Donetsk and Luhansk really felt Ukrainian and supported Ukraine. And I only realized that when I made a visit in 2016 to a city called Dnipropetrovsk. Now it's called Dnipro, and I was teaching English there to some students, and they were actually refugees from the Luhansk area. And then I first started to realize, like, okay, these people have fled Luhansk, so they are, they're not fully on board with the whole Russian narrative. They were telling me their stories, and that was my, I always knew that Russia had pulled an illegal stunt, but I never realized how even the locals were not on board with it. And that was a real eye-opener for me. And until this day, Russia tries to portray Ukraine as this divided state. But the interesting part is you always hear people about Eastern Ukraine. But Eastern Ukraine, if you look at it geographically, is bigger than just Luhansk and Donetsk. And that's mostly where people point at. So I always point at the fact that if people in Eastern Ukraine wanted to join Russia, why it's not Kharkiv or Sumy? Why are these cities resisting? Why was Kherson resisting? While demographically they had almost as many ethnic Russians as in not almost, but they had a big part, and they were not protesting. So why didn't that happen? And the answer is always that the whole thing was illegitimate altogether. But in this space, I know people are more knowledgeable about Ukraine, but the general public still believes this lie that there's a huge cultural, ethnic, and loyalty difference between Eastern Ukraine and Western Ukraine. I'm in Lviv at the moment, and yes, I must admit, when the first refugees came in 2022, there were some small problems with them speaking Russian. People here don't like Russian, but that was rather that they saw it as a political choice because they associate hearing Russian with oppression, because historically that's always been the case for Lviv. And once people started to realize, like, okay, these people are not, they don't do this out of political reasons. It's just that they haven't had the chance to learn Ukrainian. The total atmosphere changed. And currently, I'm in Lviv, and before the war, the city maybe had like 800,000 people living there. Currently, there are about 1.1 million, and of those 1.1 million, those are naturally refugees, and many of those are from Eastern Ukraine or Central Ukraine, and many of them speak Russian, and it's no problem. I'm in shops here, and I hear people speak Russian. I hear people even working here. They speak Russian because, people are switching to Ukrainian though, but you're not looked with bad eyes if you still speak Russian at the moment. And that's one important factor that Zelensky managed to do. He managed to unite the country like that. The country, in Lviv, you would hear the voices maybe 10 years back. Oh, if those if Donbass and Luhansk want to belong to Russia so badly, well, we'll let them. We won't miss them. And these voices have totally changed in Ukraine. That narrative is gone, basically. People started to realize, like, they're as much our people as we are them, basically. Back to you.
Yeah, I spent a month in Lviv last summer, and I can say this is exactly what I heard too. The the language. In fact, I have several friends who are Russophones who grew up in Kiev and a couple other places farther east, and the language issue was never, from what they said, was never a problem. The only time it was ever a problem is if somebody insisted that you speak Russian because Russian is the language that civilized people speak. I have a friend who grew up in Kiev who was told not to speak like an animal, to speak like a human being, meaning speaking Russian instead of Ukrainian. I would say the opposite is probably more the case. But yeah, I think President Zelensky is both a result and a cause of this unity. A Jew from a Russophone Jew from Eastern Ukraine was elected with over 70% of the vote. That already shows how little being Jewish or being a Russian speaker mattered to most Ukrainians. It was more important the quality of the person. And also, as you said, he has resolutely refused to allow language to be an issue. One of the things I think that's become clear in the last few years, and was not at one time, was how much of the so-called separatism in Luhansk and Donetsk was ginned up by the Russians. As we know, during 2014, they tried to instigate a rebellion in Donetsk and Luhansk, and it didn't go very well. That's why Gherkin had to come in with his troops, because the Ukrainians by themselves were not all that interested in rebelling from the central government. So in this, I think, as time goes on, we're getting more of the true historical picture. Unfortunately, a lot of people in the West know next to nothing about this part of the world, and still buy into the Russian talking points. As you were talking about, one of this is the division between West and East of Ukraine. Even though all of the demographic and sociological studies that have been done show less and less of a divide than ever. At this point, there is really not much of a difference between East and West in terms of attitudes toward the Ukrainian state, loyalty to the Ukrainian state, whether or not they want to be part of Russia. But this is part of what I think our job here at Volya Radio is, that as supporters of Ukraine, in those of us in Western Europe and in North America, is to continue to clarify what the actual history is, as opposed to the Russian talking points that so many people have been taken in by. Back to you, Vanessa.
It's so interesting that you mentioned this. I'm still busy constructing like a really big thread. I think it will be like 50 tweets of all the facts where we can see that the whole revolution was not legitimate at all. And you make one important point, the words of Girkin, because Girkin basically said, "I'm the one that pulled off the whole revolution. Without me, without my my soldier of fortune, we couldn't have pulled it off." And there's actually one really interesting event that proves this fact, because a lot of people have forgotten that Kharkiv was also overrun by these Tatushki, by these thugs that were protesting. And one of the more interesting points is that there's an article in the Moscow Times, and that basically described that those protesters back then, they want to take the important buildings of the city, and what do? They head for the mayor's office. But they don't, because they mistake the opera building for the mayor's office. So that basically proves that nobody was from that area itself, because they were just thinking, oh, this is the mayor's office. So these people were sent. And I was in 2016 in Kharkiv, and I asked a friend of mine who was living there, like, okay, and she was, let me stress, she was Ukrainian, but she was a Russian-speaking Ukrainian. So, and I asked her, like, okay, but like, what happened there? How much did people collaborate? How much did they agree with the whole thing? And she basically said, like, we didn't dare to leave our homes because we saw all this mayhem. But what we did hear of those people on the street, she says, I speak Russian, but every person speaks different dialect in Russian, like you have with English or any other language. Like, you can hear if a person is not from that region. And she said, like, all those people there, they were not from that region. What Girkin actually said is, like, if we had pushed our military, like our local soldiers of fortune, if we had pushed them also in Kharkiv, we could have also pulled it off, because that's what happened there. There's one interesting part as well. You might ask yourself, why didn't the police intervene in Kharkiv? Because that's normally what you do, right? There are a bunch of thugs on the street, and one of the reasons was that the Russians, they sort of had like bribed the mayor of Kharkiv. His name was sorry, I forgot his name, but he cooperated with another person called Dobkin, and both of them basically switched sides after one day, which was also really interesting. But to get back to your whole point, the whole Eastern Ukrainian revolution was organized, and it all starts. I was telling about these small puppet conferences in 2004 and 2005 of people who wanted their own republic, and Russia supporting that. And then there is in the Russian Duma in 2009. There's a Duma member called Konstantin Zatulin, and he basically says officially, like, okay, we should give those provinces in southern Ukraine and eastern Ukraine a sign that they can join Russia. So to make it relevant for today, it would be like, President Trump would say, like, okay, we need to give Quebec or Ontario or whatever a sign that they can join America. How would we interpret that fact? We probably would see it as a stirring up a revolution. And a lot of historians, a lot of analysts have, denied all this information. For example, another striking fact in 2013, the Russian army does a military exercise with the Belarusian army, and they have a specific description of their army exercise. And their army exercise is rescuing a Russian minority in a foreign country. So it's exactly what happened 1 year later. I'm building on a topic with all these facts. There are a lot more, but it's my guilty pleasure basically to tell them to you here, because I think they're not discussed as much as they should. And if you put all these pieces of the puzzle together, your whole picture of the legitimacy of Eastern Ukraine will change, as Donbass and Luhansk. And I think maybe for people who don't get it, let's be honest, we heard all these people talk about, oh, Luhansk, Donetsk, they need to come with Russia. And that was a story before 2022. And then Russia occupies Zaporizhia and Kherson as well. And suddenly these people are switching to those areas. And these were areas that nobody was talking about before. And now you hear, oh no, those regions should join Russia as well because they want to. Where were the signs before 2022? Nobody has them. So again, this is a big part of how Russian propaganda works. It tries to paint our narrative of history. And I think there's a big responsibility for academics in the West to really look at all the facts, to be interested, because what I've seen with a lot of people analyzing the whole thing is they took shortcuts, or you can see that they haven't read anything about Ukrainian history. They know nothing about Ukrainian politics, but they do find themselves capable in explaining the whole thing in detail. And yeah, you will always make mistakes when it comes to that. I'm not perfect either in this sense, but at least I know some stuff. At least I know the big lines. And what you will see is that it will be much easier to draw a picture of what happened. And it's also easy when you're in a discussion with a person and they try to say, for example, that, oh, those Russian minorities, they're always discriminated against. I think this maybe is one of the most powerful lies of Russia, because when you would go to, for example, Kiev in 2016 or 2017, and you would order a train ticket, and you wouldn't do it by a credit card, but you would go to the counter, all those people would talk Russian back then still. And it's a proof that, there was never this anti-Russian policy in general. It's just that Russia used a lot of anti-Ukrainian propaganda on its television, in its literature, in books, in poems, in everything. And for the Ukrainians, this is a defense mechanism, not to let Russia be such a dominant language, because once it is, it just helps the enemy with all the propaganda that's going on. Yeah, sorry, back to you, Robin.
No, I just wanted to agree with what you were saying. I mean, why there are Ukrainization laws, for example, now, none of which are draconian at all. But part of it is because, first of all, a country needs to speak its own language, and Ukraine has had a history of hundreds of years of Russian. It's part of cultural genocide of Russians trying to destroy Ukrainian language, to keep people from speaking it, to force orthographic and vocabulary changes on Ukrainians to make Ukrainian more Russian-like, which it's not. Ukrainian is a well, as they say, you and I can say. How similar Dutch and English are, because apparently that's about the Russian and Ukrainian are about as similar as Dutch and English are, and I can tell you I can't understand a word of Dutch. So, but this was this was a large part of Russia's attempt to wipe out Ukrainian culture. Was the language is a big part of the culture, so that is why Ukraine has insisted on every Ukrainian child learning Ukrainian. They don't have to speak Ukrainian, but they need to learn the national language, to have official government documents and everything written in Ukrainian. Something that it's interesting that if you look at the recent polls about it, many Russian speakers, Ukrainians, also support having Ukrainian as the only official language in Ukraine, because they understand how important it is as a symbol of an independent Ukrainian state. I think Ukraine has done an incredible job, considering how Ukrainian speakers were discriminated against during Soviet times and before, and looking even now. Ukrainian Orthodox priests have been killed in the temporarily occupied areas for the major crime of praying in Ukrainian. I think it says a lot about the character of the Ukrainian nation, that there isn't more discrimination against Russian speakers. You could understand a certain amount of anger, but you don't hear that anywhere. The only anger is against Russia. trying to take over Ukraine. It is not against Russian-speaking Ukrainians at all. That at least that anything that I've experienced. So anyway, yeah, just as I'm saying, I think that that we have to understand why, what the politics of language has to do with things, and it's a very important marker of Ukrainian nationhood, is having Ukrainian as the language, and this is part of the reason so many Russian-speaking Ukrainians are now making big efforts to either learn better Ukrainian or to speak Ukrainian more than they have in the past. Back to you, Vanessa.
You're completely right, and I know some personal examples from friends of mine. And one friend of mine, she's from Odessa. She moved to Lutsk, but this was already before the war. And Odessa is mainly a Russian-speaking city, and Lutsk is in the northwest of Ukraine. Basically, it's close to the Polish border, and naturally, people are speaking Ukrainian there. And she completely switched. She quit with Russian altogether. I have one friend from Kherson who always spoke Russian, and she actually explained to me how she changed as a person, because she grew up in Kherson, and she is about 32 now. So when she was growing up, she still had this vision of basically, she was a Russian-speaking person, and what would they do? They would dream about going to university in Moscow or St. Petersburg, because that was the part of the world they were looking at, Russia. It was their world. And at one point, she explains to me how it all changed with the events on the Crimea and how that opened her eyes. And before, she was reading, for example, famous Russian literature for children, Tanya Grotter. And Tanya Grotter is basically the ripoff of Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling has tried numerous times to get it out of the bookshops, but she never succeeded. So Tanya Grotter is still in the Russian-speaking community. It's still quite popular, and that was her world, And then she explains to me, like, I always dreamt about studying in Moscow, studying in St. Petersburg. And there was this Russian television show where you could win like a scholarship if you would answer some history questions right. And she said this was almost my dream in my childhood. I was watching this television program, and then she completely switched. And she's still speaking Russian because her parents are both Russian speakers. She was born in Yevpatoria in Crimea, small Crimean city, and she grew up in Kherson. And in Kherson, also everyone was speaking Russian, so it was normal. But now she's moved to Kiev, and in Kiev, naturally, people are now speaking Ukrainian. And I asked her about this switch, and she said, it's not much of a problem for me. I can speak Ukrainian. My grades are often, you have these language tests in Ukraine, and my grades are often better than people from Western Ukraine. She's quite a smart person. And her opinion now about Russia is basically Russia can't exist. That's her phrase now. So, the whole soft power strategy of Russia has failed. And it's something that in the West, people still can't understand, that in Ukraine, you have people who speak a mixture of Ukrainian and Russian called Surzik. You have people who speak Russian but identify as Ukrainian. You have people who speak Russian and identify as Russian. You have people who identify as Ukrainian but who are of mixed parents. And the big problem is that a lot of people in the West see speaking Russian not only as a practical thing in speaking the language, but also as a political statement, as aligning to Russia as a country. And that's probably one of the biggest lies I'm still fighting against, because a lot of Russian-speaking Ukrainians basically hate Russia for what it's doing. They have no loyalty at all. And to stress this even more thoroughly, I wasn't on Maidan in 2013, and among me were, there were quite a lot of people, and I had many conversations about why are you here, what are you doing here, what do you expect from this, and the irony is that I saw the build-up in Lviv of the Maidan happening because, it was 30 meters from my hostel was where it was all organized. So each morning I had my walk on the Maidan with my Ukrainian flag. And I remember that I had friends there who were ethnic Russians, but they were desperately wanting to join the European Union. I had friends there who were Jewish, but they desperately were wanting to join the European Union. And once I asked them about the whole Nazi stuff, it was like, we're not afraid of that. We are afraid of when the Russians will come, because that will be the real prosecution. And well, to stress that one a little bit more, you had the head rabbi of Moscow, Pinos Goldsmith, and he basically announced to Jewish people, like, you should leave Moscow now. And this was early 2022. You should leave Moscow because it's not safe. Society is going in the wrong way, and we're not safe here. And then you had the rabbi of Ukraine, basically. I forgot his name, but he is based in Odessa. And
Rabbi Bleich.
They were.
His name is Rabbi Bleich.
It was not Rabbi Bleich, it was another one, but Ukraine has different ones.
Osman is in northern part. He's in the west, but Rabbi Bleich was for many years the chief rabbi in Odessa. Jacob Bleich, I think it is. There are a lot of rabbis, though. It's a big Jewish community. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but like you said, so Ukraine has a lot of rabbis and a lot of Jewish communities in Ukraine, and they were not protesting or acknowledging that they were discriminated against, as Russian propaganda was pushing. So back to you, Robin.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention this. The Rabbi Bleich I'm talking about had a interview in the Kyiv Post a couple of years ago, and he made a very important point, which I quote ad nauseum to all of my Jewish friends who are still have been infected by this Russian, the Ukrainian Nazi crap. Pardon my French. Rabbi Bleich basically said, there was a period of about 40 years. It was a little dicey for between Ukrainians and Jews, between the two wars, and there were some pogroms that Ukrainians were involved with. There was some anti-Semitism. He said, okay, there was that was 40 years maybe. He said, Jews in Russia in 2,000 years have never had a good day. And if you're looking for anti-Semitism and you're looking for Jews being brutalized and being treated horribly, it's at the hands of Russians, not at the hands of Ukrainians. And being in the Jewish community, I have had a lot of discussions with people who will start out with, will always start out with that trap about Ukrainian anti-Semites. But once you start talking to them, I just had this last week, somebody started with that, and then I said, oh yeah, well, I remember my grandmother said, her Ukrainian neighbors were all right. It was when the Russians came that it was really bad. So it's sort of interesting, because even people who have this idea, once you talk to them a little bit, if they have had actually, have had relatives in that area of the world, very often they will come back to, oh yeah, well, I remember my great grandmother said such and such or whatever. And it, as Rabbi Blech said, there was a short period of time things were a little bit dicey, but basically Jews have been were pretty comfortable in the Ukrainian area, especially compared to what was going on in Russia and compared to what was going on in the more western part of Europe. Was it perfect? Obviously not, but to hang the anti-Semite sign on Ukraine as opposed to every other place is completely wrong, and it's counterfactual. It's back to you, Patnick.
I love the word counterfactual. I need to incorporate it in my vocabulary.
Well, it's better than saying
James,
it's bullshit, right?
yes. I see, James, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to react to the language business here. Some of my should I call them enemies or should I call them adversaries? Whichever. They speak the same language as me, and that's not uncommon around the world. So why is it a special deal in Ukraine? It isn't. not really. People either like or don't like their country, and they speak the same language as the ones who like or don't like, but are on the other side of the fence from you. So it's just preposterous. So I get the part about there being perhaps more connections with Russia, as you look at the country of Ukraine, but not the way that they're leaning east or west. Uh, Everybody voted for this initially. That was one of the things I put in the purple pill, was just a map of the percentage of people who voted for independence in the 1991 referendum, and things haven't changed much from there. I think the war could people, and even the run up to the war from independence could maybe dishearten people about how hard it is to become a true democracy and how away from Russia. But I think that also has isolated or villainized Russia even more for those Ukrainians who are paying attention to it. They have to look at this and go, will we ever be rid of them and these bastards? That's all I can think that they're saying are things like that. Oh, I love Russia because I speak Russian. No, it's a silly idea. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And one of the things that, there's oversimplification in a lot of this. One of the things that the Kiev International Institute of Sociology, which is a wonderful polling operation, they do extensive polling, they've been doing it for years. What many of the polls that they've done in the East have shown that Russian-speaking Ukrainians in Eastern Ukraine they do feel culturally closer to Russians than people in the West might. They are attached to Russian culture, but they don't want to be ruled by Russia. And this is the distinction that Russia's making a point of not noticing, and is just not played up enough because it's a little bit complex and people have trouble understanding that. You might love Pushkin, you might speak Russian, you might you might feel an affinity with things that go on in Russia, but that does not mean, as a Ukrainian, that you want Russia to come in and run your country. And that is the issue, even with a lot of people in the East who might have an affinity for other things Russian. Back to you, Betniksu.
Yeah, and if you look at it historically, you will always see that Russia plays this card as we need to protect these people. And I actually made a list out of it. And the first time Russia pulls this stunt is the Crimean War, 1852, and they say the Ottoman Empire, they're oppressing the Christians. We need to save them. And even the Ottoman ruler was asking, like, okay, but can you give me examples? Naturally, Russia didn't, because they only needed that argument as a reason to start a war. And you see this continuously with Russia. You see it with, for example, the Transnistrian war in Moldova in the beginning of the 90s. You will see this in Abkhazia, where they state like, oh, our brotherly nation, our brotherly people, the Abkhazians, we need to help them. They're being oppressed. And Russia has continuously played this card in Ukraine as well. And as often being spoken about, Putin said like, okay, those poor Russians in Eastern Ukraine, they've been bullied for 10 years. We need to save them. And it's always the card of being the savior. And they're not particularly interested in the actual fate of these people, because many Russian-speaking people in Eastern Ukraine have died because of this war, compared to before 2022, basically. So they are not there with noble intentions. They only have this masquerade. And one of the most striking ones I always point out to people, what Stalin said in the Second World War, when he invaded Poland, which he had agreed upon with Nazi Germany already in the von Ribbentrop Pact. But his official reason was, oh, the Germans are invading Poland. We need to save the Ukrainians there because there's no stable state anymore. And these are such blatant lies that if you see the strategy of Russia repeating it, you don't believe it anymore. But our problem is that many analysts don't know these small stories. And what they always try to do is they try to give legitimacy to a person speaking Russian in Eastern Ukraine on a camera, on a Russian television show, for example, who says like, "Oh, we're being oppressed. Well, the Ukrainians are discriminating us," and then there is always this danger, which is described before, Robin, of both sidism. And then they will say, yeah, probably the Russians are exaggerating, but there is a grain of truth in there because these people won't make it up. And that's the danger. You can't use both sidism when one party is blatantly lying, because if you seek the road in the middle, it will still be a lie. And that's one of the main problems I see with academics, that they use both sidism too much. My Dutch national broadcaster has also suffered from this, and then they want to do, that's one of the main problems in my country in this aspect. For example, Russia says that the Ukrainians blew up the Kakhovka dam. There's no basis for that other than the Russians stating that, who have a history of blatant lying. But the Russians produce this news, firstly, because they commit the crime themselves, and our news channels just repeat it. Russia says Ukraine blew up the Kakhovka dam, which of course was a lie. But as long as you're first with the lie, later on the proof comes that Russia had done it themselves. But imagine you're a person who is not reading the news every day and who is just superficially following this. Then this propaganda becomes really powerful, because you start saying like, oh, but didn't the Ukrainians blow up the Kakhovka dam? That was in our news, right? And that's one of our problems. Not addressing correctly the news in general about Ukraine, and this both sidism basically stressing that we should look at both parties equal, and it's a really big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things that that I have found very interesting in the last few years. Some of the best writers, contemporary writers on Ukraine now are, well, I'll name three: Timothy Snyder, Yaroslav Hrytsak, and Serhiy Plokhy. All three of them are top-notch historians. All three of them are unapologetically pro-Ukrainian. And it's really interesting because when you read, they're not writing polemics, they're writing straight history, but they're writing the truth. And they deal with Russian propaganda points, but they debunk them, and they get, it's anyway. I find it interesting that I have rethought my whole belief in the past that historians need to be apolitical, need to not be on one side or the other. When you've got two sides like we have here, you've got one that's on the side of truth and light and justice and all this stuff, and you have another side that is well, I think is unmitigated evil, and that, as you're saying, they much of what comes out of their mouths are lies. You can't treat them as equals, and this is why I find these new histories of Ukraine and of the Eastern Europe so refreshing, because they cut right through all of that. They don't feel the need to give equal treatment to something that just doesn't deserve it. So, for what that's worth, back to you, Nixon.
Actually, I picked a fight on Twitter with a historian, and he's a university teacher in the University of Amsterdam, and he was basically stating like, yeah, we know about the Russian war crimes, but we don't know about the Ukrainian war crimes yet. So probably in 50 years in time, we will judge differently about this history. And again, you have this both sidism, like probably the Ukrainians are doing it too. Probably they are just the same, but we don't have the knowledge of such events. And I'm asking him like, okay, but you have Russian Telegram groups where, even of those people who are unrelated to the national news agencies in Russia, where are those statements? You have all the Russian propaganda. Why aren't they using this? That the Ukrainians are massively committing war crimes. And then I talk about it from a strategical point of view. Like, Ukraine needs to get the support from the West. So if they would commit war crimes on a larger scale, and let me stress that in every war where hundreds of thousands of people fight, you always have a few rotten apples, but it's about the culture. And you can basically see that Ukraine has stimulated a culture where you don't commit war crimes, and Russia has given a free pass for its people because it's part of its strategy. And you say historians don't need to be political. Well, they need to be political for some aspects. I don't fully agree with you, but what I do like to stress is they need to be hungry for knowledge, and they need to be hungry for the backgrounds, because mostly when you start digging deeper, you will see what are the lies and what is the truth for a big part of it, because there is consistent build-up. And my example with the war in eastern Ukraine is a good example. Those small details where you see that Russia is just instigating these protests in Kharkiv basically is a reflection on how serious can we take the Donbass or Luhansk situation. Yeah, sorry for me rambling all off on this, but I see we have a question from Alan, so please go ahead.
A question and a comment, Vatnik and Robin. And by the way, I find this a fascinating conversation you're having tonight on Volya Radio. If you're not a student of history, or if you're not an historian reading a lot of history, if you're just I don't know, what might have been called a common reader in the past, or a headline reader of newspapers, historic revisionism, that is a constant in history. History over decades has never ever told one story, one unfolding of events, and called it true. Rather, the best historians, like Timothy Snyder, like Sergei Plohy, use history to raise questions. I think we see this playing out at its best in Timothy Snyder's books on freedom, on tyranny, in his uh, historical work, Bloodlands. Snyder is both a historian and a philosopher. History, read deeply, actually provides a philosophy of understanding the world you live in, where it came from, and where it might be going. I wonder, Vatnik and Robin, do you think the Russians use reconsideration of history to their advantage? In other words, a Russian revisionist has to be treated, in his opinion, as seriously as any historian looking at facts anew. And of course, new facts come out all the time. A really good example of that would be the unlocking of the KGB archives briefly after the Soviet Union fell. They've been locked up again. But among the things we learned, Lenin ordered the murder of the Tsar and his family. Just a tiny little historical mystery that was solved and resolved because the KGB archives were opened for a very short time. I don't think more than 2 years. What do you think about this? Do the Russians use reconsideration of history in order to confuse the majority of people?
Without a doubt, in my opinion. That's they seem to have whole stables of people coming up with nonsense to try to confuse matters. One of the things we've seen about Russian propaganda in general is they're not necessarily trying to push one story or another, one side, and they're trying to confuse people and get people to the point where they're not able to, where they become so unsure of what's right and what's wrong that they throw up their hands and don't do anything. And I think that's definitely what we're seeing here. Well, let's go over to James. Go ahead, James.
Well, reconsidering history and rewriting history are different things, Alan. And I think you were talking about something different than rewriting history, but that's sort of what they've done very successfully. They've rehabilitated Stalin, for example. They've recreated the events. It was the Russian or Germans, pardon me, who were, I'm going to mispronounce the city name, who committed the war crimes in Khitan or however you say that. Yeah, so reconsider history.
Katyn.
No, Katyn, thank you. No, I don't think they reconsider much. They just rewrite it. So I don't know if that's the same question you were asking, but
I'm just going to jump in here, James, and say you're exactly right, and much better put than I put it. And you know what? We are seeing the rewriting of history today in the United States. The rewriting of history in the United States after a model provided by the Kremlin rewriters. Sure, in commercial TV, on the stage, on a film set, you might hear someone yell, "Get me rewrite," but you never, ever want to hear someone yell in a history department, "Get me rewrite," because it means exactly what James just said.
I wanted to respond as well to Alan because he makes a really great point. What I found particularly interesting was the interview with Tucker Carlson and Putin. And as much as I hated Tucker Carlson going there, it did give some interesting insights, and especially the Rurik story, because Putin was portraying this character, this historical character called Rurik, as one person who ties all the knots that the Ukrainian Kievan Rus Empire was actually part of a Russian empire, and that Rurik had started it all. And it's so interesting because when you look at this Rurik, there is almost no historical basis for it. There's this monk who describes Rurik about 2 centuries later, and he's basically described as a fictional character. There is no actual proof that he even existed. But Putin uses this as a way to connect the dots. So you see this whole I would say Machiavellianism in the way that whenever something is useful historically, we use it. Whenever is something to our disadvantage, we wipe it under the carpet. And one famous example is the Gulag Museum. There was a Gulag Museum actually portraying the crimes of Stalin and his successors. And first it was open, but then it was restricted in how much time it could be open. Then it was restricted in what it could say, and most recently it was closed altogether. And the person who was keeping it open was prosecuted. And that's what Russia does. If the history is to our disadvantage, we wipe it under the carpet. And like you can't say that there is a war going on in Ukraine, in Russia, because you will be prosecuted. Citing actual historical facts that don't support the narrative of the regime is as dangerous, I would say. So yeah, back to you, Robin.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. That well, Stalin has gone from being pretty much erased out of Russian history to being a hero again. Putin refers to him all the time as some good example. I mean, the man was a mass murderer, so I guess Putin feels some commonality with him.
Yeah, and I would say it's a general approach of fascists that they don't want to be critical to other historical fascist figures, because if you are critical towards them, then it's a mirror towards your own policies. So, like you were saying, that in America, Trump tries to rewrite history. I don't think it's a good sign, because with Trump, we've seen all the character traits of somebody who tries to erase everything and everyone who can hold him accountable, whether it be judges, whether it be the press, whether it be a law firm whose lawyers have been critical against him. whether it be the education system. And I think, yeah, it's a big danger. Back to you, Alan.
I was just going to say, Vatnik and Robin, on one of the marathon interviews when a Beefeater fella and Jonathan Fink were with us, Beefeater made a very important point, and you can make the same point when you consider the history that is being pushed. Beefeater said that disinformation is a loyalty test. In other words, in order to pass the loyalty test, you have to repeat the disinformation. You have to raise your hand and say, yes, I approve this message. It's the same thing with history that's rewritten as the Russians have rewritten it. It is a loyalty test. And to Vatnik's point about Stalin and Robin's point about Stalin, you know, the Putin regime is putting up more statues of Stalin than any other figure from Russian history, putting up more statues of Stalin today than of any other figure from Russian history. Maybe after Putin dies, they'll do what the ancient Romans did and just replace the heads on the statues of emperors so that all those Stalin statues will get a Putin head. Convenient.
Very cute. I'm sorry. This just reminded me of something I just have to share because I thought it was so cute. There was a Lenin statue somewhere in eastern Ukraine that was still up recently. What they did was they put on a big mustache and eyebrows so that it looked like Taras Shevchenko, and they left it. I thought it was hysterical. Anyway, over to you, James.
Well, I would think they'd have to take some of the ankle off somewhere along the body line since he's so short. But anyway, but has a big head, so you can't really shrink it all in the head. The other thing that I want to say is that we talk about history a lot, and it seems like that's far away, long ago. And I just want to say, at the pace of TV, they're changing history. They're telling us, they're giving us interpretations. I can think of Fox in particular about what's going on in the market and how this is good for us and how this is, yeah. And it's like, I thought, 1,000-point loss in the Dow Jones was enough to get fired over as a president. And here you are saying this is good and necessary. And it's bullshit. So I just wanted to chime in and say that timeline of how things become history, how quickly, sometimes it's pretty immediate, the rewriting of it.
Well, I think you make a great point. And, history, in my eyes, is always a mirror. And in that sense, it's interesting to history because you might see repeating events and they won't always have the same outcome, but you do start to understand processes better if you know the history. And I think that's my observation, that probably everyone here in the space, maybe in 30, 40 years, they will tell their story to their children or young people in that age. And they will try to explain what happened now. Because for us now, there is so much going on. It might be a fog. It might be hard to distinguish everything and all the roots and the basis of it all. But in time, we will observe how things went. And that's why I particularly am interested in following everything that newsletters are bringing out right now, because these times are, groundbreaking in my eyes. I wanted to get to make one point about what Alan earlier said, and Robin basically also, like, if you want to know what happened, if you want to know the history, in my eyes, the first thing on every subject is that you need to be curious. You need to be curious, and you need to be curious to all sides. And that doesn't mean you need to acknowledge the information from all sides the same way, but you need to know what's out there. And then for me, what really helped me understand, well, this whole situation was my travels to Ukraine. I've been about 20 times to Ukraine in between 2012 and 2021. And the story of local people, that is what helped me the most, because what many historians do is they take the statements of politicians and they try to portray that as a reflection of what's going on in society. But you get an impression by that, but sometimes the truth lies with the ordinary man who doesn't need to polish his message, who can speak freely. And I have I have an HR background basically, and this is an important lesson that a teacher once gave me: is if you want to know what's going on in a company, for example, they have a big number of sick leave, you can go to the accountancy and they will give you the exact number of employees that have been not been present. You can go to the manager and he might give you a message with some political layers, because he needs to watch out that his statements are not painting himself badly or his management style. But you can also ask the cleaning lady. And what I learned is that the cleaning lady often has the more interesting answers, because she won't polish her message. She will honestly say, "Oh, that person from that department, they're always fighting, so that's why he's home, not because he's sick," for example. So the story of the ordinary person, the ordinary Ukrainian, because it's about Ukraine. I think that's maybe the model of Volya in general. It's about Ukraine. It's about Ukrainians, and their voice matters. How they perceive the world, how they see the solution for this conflict, is essential to understand it. And I'm hugely put off by all these let's say analysts who just take Ukraine as like a game of risk. Oh, we give that territory to Russia, we have a ceasefire, and it's all done. And the solution is about people. What will happen with the kidnapped people? What will happen with the people being oppressed right now? And to finish my statement, there was a really interesting video coming out today of a Crimean girl who spoke for the European Union for Congress. And she basically stated that once she returns in 2022, early 2022, once she returned to the Crimea and she didn't want to take a passport, and she was of Tatar descent, that she was actually imprisoned for 2 years just because she didn't want to take a Russian passport and thus give loyalty to the regime. And the stories of people like that tell you why it is so wrong to just give the Crimea to Russia, because some people perceive it as, oh, but those people wanted it that way. No, you're throwing people like that Tatar girl under the bus because they have no protection as a minority. Yeah, sorry for my long rant. Back to you, Alan.
No, Vatnik, you're exactly right, especially in talking about the testimony of ordinary people. I think it's interesting. People who read history uh, should not only seek out historians they can trust, but delve into the bibliographies, see the historians they have trusted and who they have borrowed from, but also seek the original sources in the bibliographies. And remember, so many of these original sources, especially of ordinary people, exactly as Vatnik is talking about right now, they go unpublished for decades and decades. These are veins of gold that only become available to us over time. And I'm thinking specifically, probably more people have read William Shire's the Rise and Fall uh, of the Third Reich than have read Victor Klemperer's diary, a Jewish man hiding in Dresden, 3 volumes. I Will Bear Witness. I think that is the published name of these diaries. Yes, read William Shire, But if you really want to understand through the eyes of a Jewish survivor in Nazi Germany, go to the original source, go to the diary, go to the personal testimony of an individual himself. And we are actually going to have these resources sometime in the future from Ukrainians who live under Russian occupation today in Luhansk and Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson, and Crimea. We will have their personal testimony, and that will help us understand the Russian terror that has descended across Ukraine exactly as the Iron Curtain of Stalin descended across Eastern Europe after the Second World War. It is no different than that. Why more people are not drawing that parallel, I don't understand.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. And I think you're absolutely right about that. And one of the things that a number of people have pointed out, I think it was Fritzak, among others, the way you can reach people is the individual testimonies. We know that Speaker Johnson, at least for a while, allowed some of the funding to go through for Ukraine after Razum brought um, a Ukrainian evangelical from Odessa, I believe, who had lost his family in a Russian strike. They got him in to speak to Johnson, to speak using the same, using the same worldview, the same vocabulary, and it's those individual testimonies that make it very hard for people to look away. It's easy to look at statistics, to look at border, moving borders and military things, and to be very dispassionate about it all. But when you hear about the mother whose child was stolen from her by the Russians, or you hear about the little child whose father was killed, or any other number of things, the 3-year-old with the prosthetic because her leg was blown away in a Russian strike, those things are much harder for people to ignore, and they can change hearts and minds. So I think it's not only does it give you a much clearer perspective on what was really going on in the country, because the politicians, even with the best of intentions, are only giving their view of things, but it also has the ability to make this real to people who otherwise, think of it as something far away and don't really relate to the fact that these are people just like us who are going through this. Thanks.
It's so yeah, such great points you both make. And Alan really struck gold when he mentioned the bibliographies of like history books or books in general. I recently saw, I forgot her name, but I saw a statement of a famous American historian who said, like, okay, if you buy a history book and the topic is about a certain region, for example, Iran or Saudi Arabia or whatever, and you look in the bibliography and you don't see any Arabic sources in there, or you don't see any Farsi sources in there, or local sources uh, from people in there, the book is probably garbage. And she says, if you are a historian and you want to analyze Iran, you need to know Farsi. You need to know the language, because otherwise, it's you can't reach that depth, because what you will do is you will only copy other people from your own language who who touched a little bit of the subject, and you will wrap it up as one big puzzle, but the pieces don't fit. And this is what I see with Ukraine in general happening. And I also famously see this with these peace movements. I always ask them, where are the Ukrainians? If you claim that you support their interests, why are there no Ukrainians supporting your message? Why? And I'm all about peace. Don't get me wrong, but I'm about peace on just full terms. And what I notice is that a lot of peace movements have been hijacked by either people who are anti-NATO, or who have some Russian sympathies, or who are so radically against every form of violence, that they rather have the victim become a slave than than acknowledge their suffering. And sorry, I see two hands up. First, I'll go to Alan, and then I will go to Mila. Thank you.
I'm not here to take up time and not allow others to speak. But Batnick is exactly right. Peace movements can actually be hijacked by warmongers, and I happen to think that is exactly what we are seeing today in Donald Trump's striving for peace with Vladimir Putin. Putin is in the process of hijacking this peace movement that belongs to Donald Trump. Practically no one else who understands what Russia is doing, committing genocide against Ukraine. You cannot negotiate peace with a genocider. Get that through your head. But Putin is intent on hijacking this so-called peace process. There is no process yet. And it is Putin who is the warmonger. I wish someone could deliver that message to Donald Trump, but he's just too goddamn dense.
I fully agree with you, and I think the problem with Trump is that he's not really that interested in the fate of the Ukrainians. He just wants a good peace for himself. He just wants to have a Nobel Prize, maybe, or to push it through. And it's about people, like we said before. And because of this reason, I'm so proud that we have Mila coming up, because Mila grew up in the Crimea. She has spoken before numerously on Volya. Her perspective is really interesting, so go ahead, Mila.
Hello, I came to scold you a little, but first, why don't you give the hand to Jonathan? I see his hand for around 30 minutes already.
We make those decisions based on a bunch of things. I'd love to hear what you have to say, Mila.
Okay. First of all, Crimean Tatars, not Tatars. Crimean Tatars are a different ethnicity. That was my scold. Secondly, I think I wanted to offer anyone interested to pronounce Katyn. It's the sound between E and E. And I tried writing some transcription, but it's not a good job. So I came just to pronounce that for you. Katyn, and that is the second syllable stress. Yeah. Thirdly, I want really to say that, thank you so much for being here and caring still, because even I sometimes don't have any energy to care. And also, I agree very much with what Nick Soup and everyone who spoke about importance of evidence that is submitted or created by people who lived there. I'm sure my perspective can be different vastly from a perspective of a fellow Crimeans who is just, I don't know, a couple years older or younger, or lived in another city. That already will be change of perspective, but it's valuable that we still have some. And Alan, maybe you want to help me write a book about memory?
Oh, Mila, I would love to help you write such a book. And I would be honored. But, I am so undisciplined. I'm not
Me
I'm
too. You
not the
see, me
editor you
too.
want.
Yeah.
Alan's underselling himself. Don't believe him, Mila.
Well, I really need to start from somewhere, so I think I really need to understand the format and my expectations of what do I want to write exactly. Because honestly, processing these memories is not super easy. And I'm very grateful that Vatnik Soup helped me last Saturday to undig some of my memory and even yes, some memories I put on such a far shelf that I didn't even remember that they exist. And also probably now is the most like right time and distance to start analyzing what I remember while I still remember, but while it is still not lost somehow. But I think I couldn't be done doing that earlier because life under occupation and life outside it's very different style. It's very different what you see around yourself. It's very different how you behave, what stereotypes like of moving, of observing reality around you, what you have. It's quite different. And if I were writing something when I stayed there, I mean, I have some diaries, but they are just not about this topic. They are probably like a witness of me growing up, and I deleted a huge part of it. So I think my perspective would be totally different. It's not that it would be on the oppressor's side, but I think I would not feel free to write some certain things. Even now, I don't feel like 100% free to speak here and write something and be public. But I made like a conscious decision that I am ready to show my face, to show my name. And they don't, like, I don't really have a family on paper who could be influenced by such of my decision. So, I mean, I don't have the need to hide in order to protect the family. I can be a human and I can be veritable in this capability. That's me. Back to you.
Thank you, Mila. Дуже дякую за те правлення. We need work on our accents, so it's always appreciated. Alan, go ahead.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, Mila, memory is a lifelong exercise. And it is so important for people like you, Mila, to simply write down experience. Choose to make it public when and as you wish. But knowing the life stories of people like you who have gone before and will come after gives strength and courage and so many other traits we all need to walk through this world, and an extraordinarily dangerous world. I regard the world as more dangerous than any I have ever lived in before. And I live safely in the United States of America. I'm not in Kharkiv. I'm not in Sumy. I'm not in Odessa. I'm not in Kiev. And so, from you, as you are able to do it, write your story, because your story will give so much to others who live now and who will come after you. And I'm sure it would be an extraordinary testament to humanity. And what does it mean to be human? living in a time of terror. We wish that on no one. And yet millions of Ukrainians live this experience every single day.
Thank you so much for the statement, Alan. I see Milan wants to react, so go ahead.
I wanted to say that, like, thank you for making my decision probably firmer, because I don't pursue any popularity or something. I am quite introverted person, actually. But yes, I do find that to be important because, as you mentioned, diaries of a person who was hiding in Germany. I also read my bunch of such books, and yeah, that's why I think that it should be like somehow created. I think we don't really have enough. Even if we had 1,000 of books of this genre here, exactly from one point of geography, it would still not be enough probably, because everyone really sees everything in their own way. And that's why I opted for asking Letnik Soup to help interviewing me, because that is a record, so I can transcribe it and I can already have some verified written memories. I'm grateful.
No, I think we should turn it around. Volya is very grateful that you took the time and the effort and you dug deep into your own soul telling this whole story, because some memories weren't easy, let's be honest. And yeah, the only thing I want to add to that is that we had a lot of positive response towards your, towards your whole, the whole interview, basically the statements you gave, the insights you gave. And the thing about it is that it's unreplaceable, because we will never read this kind of stuff in the newspapers. And we will hardly ever read such stuff in articles online. We will sometimes read some templates of it. Oh yeah, people were tortured in Crimea. But we won't understand the whole mechanisms, the whole considerations of the victim, what happened in total, basically. So again, we're very grateful. And your contributions here in Volya have always been great. I think I speak for a lot of people stating that.
Yeah, I would second that thought. Thanks, Soup. We've been so grateful to you, Mila, and I wanted to point at anyone who missed that interview. It is up on Spotify, and it's definitely worth listening to. So thank you for joining us. It's we're in your debt, not the other way around.
Yesterday, someone asked me, because again, I think I'm getting not angrier, but more annoyed, I think. And I came to the space and said that, guys, I totally appreciate you talking about like history, hypothesis, what can be done, but you don't talk about actions. So here am I with my actions. Let's do this. Let's write to political prisoners. Let's make a report. Let's call our representatives. And someone asked me, like, okay, what is the first actionable point before our next week meeting? And I was like, huh? I don't know about any. What so? Do you know something?
I'm a very chaotic person, so for me, it's it's in my eyes, it's very wrong to say, oh, we set this goal and we want to have this result in a week. What I've done mostly within NAFO, in the NAFO community with other people discussing Ukraine is, I would compare it a little bit with fishing, basically. So sometimes I try to dig for information, and I won't catch a fish for maybe hours, and sometimes I will catch a fish in 5 minutes. And it would be very wrong to predict on forehand, like I need to know that I have a fish in like 30 minutes, because sometimes that goal is too sharp and sometimes it's too long, basically. And the reason for that is basically like, if we start putting results out there like that, it suggests that we will already know the outcome. And in my eyes, the best insights happen when you are spontaneous, when you don't know beforehand what will happen. And I'll give you one small example. I'm in Lviv right now. I had some contacts here who spontaneously invited me to like a drone factory, and that was because they trusted me enough, and they wanted to see me and they wanted to get the word out of there. But the whole process of getting there was a coincidence, because I coincidentally met this person. I coincidentally kept in touch. I coincidentally met in Lviv again. We started talking in a basis that built trust. But if I would have started with saying like, okay, I'm here now, and in a month I want to visit a drone factory, and I would approach all these people, etc., and they would probably not trust me straight away, because first you need to build that way of trust, and you can determine beforehand who will trust you, because that's their decision. So I vehemently hate these settings like, okay, we are here and we need to achieve this. I think you can only put that in a broad perspective, because sometimes we as people are more productive than other times. Sometimes we are more lucky with the information we stumble upon or the insights we got, and sometimes we are unproductive, and we also need to respect that one as well. Alan, go right ahead.
I was just going to say that, Nick, coincidence is so important. And there have been so many coincidences that uh, have occurred here on Twitter, here in Volya Radio, especially. I don't regard them as coincidences. I don't regard them as random. When you are able to draw together such a great group of people as Volya has drawn together, you have a community. Volya Radio is building a community. It has built a community, but it continues to broaden that community with every single broadcast. And that's why, to every listener, if you haven't shared this space, share it. If you haven't shared a Volya Radio fundraiser, share it. Share it however you wish, on Twitter, in Facebook, on Spotify, whatever your social media is. Let the coincidences grow the community. And especially right now, for weeks and weeks, Ukraine has been in its most perilous moment of this genocidal invasion that Russia launched against it. It wasn't on February 2022. It's now. It's now because of the uncertainty of Donald Trump. It's now because of the uncertainty that Donald Trump and so many of his cabinet appointees are sowing, especially in American minds. It's now because Putin is hijacking the the ceasefire discussion and Trump's rather vapid attempt to reach a peace. It now is Ukraine's most perilous moment. So reach out, get more people here to Volya. There's no more important space than Volya Radio right now. I mean, I really don't think there is. Listeners here tonight have heard Mila, Vatnik, Robin, James, others. So listen and respond. most of all, respond to that one tweet in the nest where you can make a generous contribution to help Ukraine. Be selfish about it. Help yourself. Help yourself by supporting Ukraine.
Thank you, Alan. Eloquent as usual. Yeah, and I think the other thing that I would say is not only is Volya Radio important because of the community we have here, and I'm so grateful to this community. I never thought I would have so many friends all over the world as I have now because of Volya Radio. But also because being here and listening to our discussions, it gives you the tools to be a much more effective advocate for Ukraine out in the real world. I have found, it used to be a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago or so, and I started getting involved in Volya Radio soon after the full-scale invasion. I was angry. I was upset. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't have all of the tools. I didn't understand what was Russian propaganda and what was true. I didn't understand the answers that there are to some of the most outrageous, outrageous lies that the Russians try to perpetrate, or the misunderstandings that some even people of goodwill have. By being here and knowing all of you, and by hearing our wonderful speakers who come on, people like Mila, people like War Doggo, especially our Ukrainian friends, Andriy, the people who've come from the front lines, we're learning to be better advocates because we have all the tools now. I find I get much less upset when I speak to people anymore when they repeat Russian lies because I know how to answer them now. And I can see, that I have an effect because I've got those facts at my fingertips. And that's what all of us are doing here. And it's extremely important. And, I think that's one of the most reasons I'm so happy to be working with Volya Radio is because I think we're giving people the tools to become much more effective supporters of Ukraine. Back to you, Alan.
Really important thing you just said, Robin. With the tools, you can actually keep your calm and keep on. And that is probably the most important thing every supporter of Ukraine can do right now. Keep calm and keep on. And Robin is exactly right. When Robin and I were on Twitter Spaces 1 or 2 or even 3 years ago, you know, there were a number of nights when I couldn't keep it together because of what the Russians were doing against Ukraine. I mean, Robin knows this extremely well. I've audibly cried on Volya Radio because I couldn't keep it together. But with the tools Robin is speaking about, and that is information, the ability to diffuse Russian disinformation, to talk to anyone sensibly about the Russian genocide against Ukraine, you will be amazed at how calm and how forceful you can be, because calmness and being forceful and persuasive and effective all go together.
Thank you, Alan. Oh, back over to you, Mila.
I just want to recommend one more tool. It is the tutorial from Zmina, and that is the tutorial on how to write a letter to political prisoner. I want to explain that I have some insight in that system. It is really dark. It is really gloomy. I don't know how prison looks in USA, but probably one could see the memes or just fascinations with Nordic prisons because they look utterly humane. It's really like one room for one person. You have books, you may have computer on some conditions. And Russian prisons are not like that. When I don't know, I think again, we wrote so much about that, about horrors, about total bloody horror that is going on there. People are tortured. Like when you were gasping from horror reading about Syrian prisons, we were not really like shocked or something, because we know that it is already been going on right here. And the letters to these people is one very important tool on how their life can be really saved. We know that because we saw some interviews from guys who were exchanged as prisoners of war, and they tell on YouTube about the horrors they had to sustain, and they tell that at least the presence of these letters allows prison people, like managers, I don't know, prison guards, not guards, but on a higher level. It allows them to see that, oh, if something goes on, maybe the nosy, ugly journalists will come and ask me something. That is uncomfortable. That is what I don't want to see. So maybe this guy will get one food more. Maybe they will somehow keep themselves from being completely devastated, because they will know that someone is taking care. And that one letter, I really love the tutorial. You can find it in comments. That tutorial really shows everything that you need to know about it. Whom to write, how to write, what kind of information to include, what kind of information will not pass the censor eyes. It is a wonderful tool, and I wish we all wrote at least one letter a week. I don't think it is too much, but it is maybe the whole world for someone in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mila. If I put up in the nest the first tweet now, a link to the website of Zmina, the Human Rights Center in Ukraine. I don't know much about it, honestly. I'm going to, after I get off, I'm going to spend some more time looking at it. It looks like a wonderful organization. There's a lot of really good information, just even from a brief looking at the homepage. So anyway, that's up in the first tweet in the nest now. Prince Heather, welcome.
I was just going to say it's a really good org. I get a lot of information from them. That's what I was going to say.
Thank you. So I should know them already. Good. I'm glad I do now.
When I found them, I said, why haven't I known about these guys before? And ever since then, they've just been somebody that I really look to. What I will say is, I actually have them on I have a specific list I follow. A specific list I follow for topics of genocide, and they are one of the Human Rights Center. Zimna Human Rights Center is one of those that I have on that list. So there you have it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so everybody up in the nest, go get that, grab that URL while we're still up. But we'll be actually, Prince Heather is going to be up in a few minutes for the very important genocide in Ukraine program next. So don't go anywhere when Vatnik Soup and I are done. Back to you, Vatnik Soup.
I see Fog Tyrant still has his hand up, so let's go to him.
Oh, thank you. I didn't see it. Yeah, go ahead, Fog Tyrant.
Hello, everybody. How everybody's doing? All good? Nice. So I've started my little project, which is Orange Man versus the Orange. It's a live stream It's going to be 24/7. My calculations are that it might last 2 to 3 months, and let's see if the orange is going to win against Trump. So
Is
let's
this like
see.
the head of lettuce against whoever that was in the UK? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, it's a Liz Truss spin-off.
Liz Truss,
We're
that's
doing
right.
an orange. We're doing the orange. I've left the mic on in there, so if people want to join after this or in between, then feel free and just rip off Donald Trump and just let it go there. So yeah. On another news is that Donald, the Orange Man, speaking of the devil, he just came up and he says he would like NATO to help invade Greenland. So
Oh, that'll
I don't know.
happen.
I don't know if Elon Musk has slipped in some ketamine on him, or I don't know. That this is getting bizarre by the hour now. But yeah, on a more serious note, is that something that we are kind of missing the boat with is, or we don't talk about is Taiwan. And the reason I mention this is that um, Russia has invaded Ukraine, a superpower. America wants to invade Greenland and Canada, a superpower that wants to, or aspires to, or threatens. Now, where does that leave China? China says, well, if these two can do it, who's going to stop me to do it to Taiwan? So the issue with this is that at the moment China is stopped, or as they call it, contained, and Taiwan is very strategic because it keeps China on its shores. Now, if China was to take Taiwan, they would have a front-facing island, which means they can go onto the open seas, which means they can be not contained anymore. They can send their submarines to America, to wherever they want, and they can rightfully claim they're a major superpower. And frankly, I don't want to speak Chinese, or I don't want to learn in the future that my children would speak Chinese by force, or that we're going to open some sweatshops because the Chinese dictated so. This rhetoric that Trump is putting out, I want Greenland, I want Canada, it doesn't play well at all. And the good news is you can do something about it. Tomorrow is a protest day on the 14th, and it's going to last for 3 days. So 14, 15, and 16th, there are going to be mass protests in America. And if you haven't heard of it, the more reasons that you need to go outside, because they're censoring you. So 14th, 15th, and 16th, get out there, write funny jokes about Trump, funny caricatures. Do call him stupid because he really hates that. And another fun fact I discovered not so long ago is this. On average, a human being has got about 20 to 30,000 words in their vocabulary that they use, out of 1 million words possible in the English language. So we only use about 20 to 30,000, and that's the average. So average people like myself, a little bit silly and a bit stupid. But Donald Trump, he averages about 10 to 15,000, which means he is clinically stupid. And possibly some shepherd with sandals and flip-flops in Afghanistan could be more intelligent than Donald Trump. So I beg you to go out there and protest. And while I'm at it, hit that share button at the top so we get more people to listen, and we can get more help to Ukrainians. and later on we can bribe you with some kind of donations. I don't know. Peace, Slava Ukraini.
Herom Slava.
Here I'm Slava. And Alan, I'm sorry. We need to make a transition pretty soon to understanding genocide, because we do have a hard stop tonight in about 45 minutes to an hour. So, but go ahead while we wait for Nancy and Gina to get here.
I understand completely, Prince. I will drop down quickly after saying really appreciated.
You don't have to leave.
Well, no, I'm not going to leave. I'll come back. You know how much I love understanding genocide with you and Nancy and Gina. I've always said one of the most important broadcasts ever made here on Twitter and recorded now on Volya Radio. But I just want to go back to the beginning of Vatnik's and Robin's discussion and Mila's important contribution looking for first person testimony, one of the most remarkable and powerful books I've ever read about one person's experience. It's Eugenia Ginsburg, Into the Whirlwind. You want to understand the Soviet and Russian gulag as it exists today. You want to consider what Mila just said about uh, learning how to write to a prisoner of war. Read that book. And with that, I'll step down, really looking forward to understanding genocide. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us here for the radio. We look forward to seeing you again. Your audience. Your audience.